I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
Listening to Insight for Living. To search the Scriptures with Chuck Swindoll, be sure to download his newly formatted Searching the Scriptures studies by going to insight.org/studies. And now the message called, What If You Struggle with a Permanent Disability?
I want to speak to all of you who struggle with disabilities. In other words, I want to speak to everyone here today. Since we are all disabled in one way or another. You may not agree with that statement. In fact, you may resent it. If you do, you are especially the first person I want to talk to today. You may be the type of person who finds great joy in your own competence and great pride in your own adequacies and ambitious thoughts. Truth be told, you may not only wish to impress others with your capabilities, you may secretly desire to eclipse others of equal status. You see, appearing self-sufficient is terribly important to many people. And though we may not like the way this sounds, pride lurks at the core of self-sufficiency. It's been my observation that there are at least 3 different types of people who appear what I would call super adequate, extremely self-sufficient. The first would be the highly intelligent, those with minds that are quick. You take tests and you love taking tests because you get all the answers right. You have rapid comprehension, a great memory, a keen wit, high IQ. It's easy for the very bright person to appear clever and competent and sometimes even suave. The highly intelligent often are impressive because they seem so self-confident. There's a second category, and that would be the greatly gifted. You with artistic skills or athletic skills. You with the ability to handle yourself with creativity. You have talents that border near the extraordinary, far more than the majority of the rest of us. It's easy for the greatly gifted to appear super adequate, completely self-sufficient. The third would be the deeply religious. You seem to live in the realm of the ultra-holy, which gives off an air of sufficiency and a depth of spirituality that others rarely attain. You're very adept in the Scriptures. You can pray easily, whether in public or in private, and words seem to flow as you describe the depths of spiritual truth. You have a deep religious ability. Please understand me here. There is nothing wrong with any of the above. Nothing innately wrong with being that intelligent or that gifted or that religious. It isn't fair, but there's nothing wrong with it. The rest of us look upon it and think, my, how great that must be. However, I remind you, any of the 3 or all of the above and others can be a source of enormous pride, blinding us to the reality that nothing we are or have or are able to do originates with us. I think Paul put it better than anyone in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. What do you have that you did not receive? Or as the New Living Translation renders it, what do you have that God hasn't given you? A bright mind? You didn't give yourself that mind. You may have continued your education and cultivated it, but you didn't give yourself your great memory. God gave it to you. You didn't give your hands the ability to paint a canvas, or to sculpt a stone, or to throw or catch a football, or put the round ball in the hoop, or to become All-American while you were in college. You didn't give yourself that coordination. You didn't give yourself this depth of spiritual interest. Here's a major question that arises in my mind and ours. How does God enable us to rely on His strength, even though we may be exceedingly capable in our strength? You get that? How does God enable us to rely on His strength when we are, in our own selves, rather capable, competent, and sufficient? The answer, and you won't like it, God uses trials and tests and disabilities that level us, that keep us humble. He uses pain and brokenness, whether it is the pain of the loss of an adult child that levels us, or the pain of some disease that won't go away, or the loss of something very significant like our occupation, or our physical ability due to a stroke. He reaches our pride through pain. And He uses the pain and the brokenness to replace the arrogance and the pride, to make us consciously dependent on Him. It's a truth, tragically, some do not learn throughout their adult life. But those who do are remarkable individuals. What we must understand is that God uses broken instruments to make incomparable music through life. I thought of that when I read the words of Jack Reimer, syndicated columnist who wrote a story about the great violinist Itzhak Perlman. Perlman, as many of you who love music know, had polio as a child, walks with crutches and with braces on both his legs. Instead of arranging to be seated on stage at the beginning of his performance, Perlman deliberately does not hide the fact that he must reach his chair with great effort. Instead of closing the curtain until he's in place, he leaves the curtain open as he makes his way across the stage, slowly and methodically. Finally sitting down in the chair, he puts his crutches on the floor, undoes the clasps on his legs, then bends down and picks up his violin, nods to the conductor, and proceeds to play. As Reimer describes it, there is a certain majesty in his ritual. During a 1995 concert, a string on Itzhak Perlman's violin suddenly snapped. Everyone in the concert hall could hear it, and they wondered what he would do. Perlman closed his eyes, and after a moment of reflection, signaled the conductor to begin again. Though anyone who knows music understands it's impossible to play a symphonic work with just 3 strings, Perlman was undaunted. Apparently, you could see this superb artist actually recomposing the piece in his head as he went along, inventing new fingering in various positions not written in the music to coax never before heard sounds from his now 3-string violin. The sophisticated New York audience watched and listened in awe, knowing they were witnessing a truly groundbreaking performance. When the piece was over, they exploded into appreciative applause. Mr. Perlman smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, and then said in a soft, reverent tone, "You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left." Years later, in a book titled A Place of Healing, quadriplegic Johnny Erickson writes this related to that. "That's another truth that enables me to keep going. Whatever strings are broken in our lives, if we concentrate, if we apply what we know, we can still play beautiful music with what we have left. In fact, it will be music that no one else can play in the same way. This is a lesson," she adds, "a lesson I've learned in a wheelchair for so many years, and have had to relearn in these days and nights of unremitting pain. Sometimes you have to take what's left and coax out of life something new and different. Life becomes, I love this word, a recomposition, a series of new chords. If you'll accept this analogy, severely disabled people aren't your regular violins, and God doesn't perform in our lives in the ordinary way. People suffering from debilitating injuries, terminal illnesses, or chronic physical distress aren't your standard musical instruments in the orchestra. We can't do everything able-bodied people can do in their physical strength and mobility and vitality. It takes a special skill to bring music out of broken instruments, and the one who does deserves recognition and glory. God is that one. God is the one who finds incomparable beauty and makes matchless music using the most unexpected and unlikely of instruments. All of this prepares us for the testimony of the great disabled Apostle Paul, and how rarely you will have that adjective connected to his name, though it's true, as it should be connected to your name and mine. We're all disabled in one way or another. Some more obvious to the naked eye than others, but we all, deep within, struggle with our own list of disabilities. If we knew that, and if we remembered that, we would never pedestalize a soul on this earth, for we would realize they too are fellow strugglers. Now, you talk about a classic example of highly intelligent, greatly gifted, and deeply religious. Is there one more so than the Apostle Paul himself? I can think of none more than he. His religious resume could stand up against anyone who has ever lived, their day or our day. His credentials impressive, his pedigree pristine. Matter of fact, Paul was the recipient of remarkable visions and revelations that set him on even a higher plateau until a disability came that leveled him and stole away his own self-sustaining pride. To begin with, we read in 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 4, as we put together a brief description of Paul as a man of this and a man of that. To begin with, he is a man of unsurpassed privileges. Verses 1 through 4. Look at the privileges. I was caught up in the third heaven. How many do you know caught up in the third heaven? You can't name one. He calls it later paradise. I've never known a soul who's ever been to paradise and lived to tell the story. I was caught up in the third heaven 14 years ago. Whether in the body or out, I don't know. Only God knows. But I do know this, I was in that place of paradise. I heard things so astounding. I saw revelations so amazing. I cannot put them into words. For God revealed to me a plan that would unfold in the days ahead, tying in beautifully with what had happened in the past. I saw it all. It was all portrayed in front of me. Think about it. Don't rush ahead. Think about this. First of all, he has kept all of this to himself for 14 years. How many do you know, and we cannot name a one, who would be caught up into a third heaven and would be given revelations from God himself, who would keep that to himself for a day, to say nothing of 14 years? He didn't rush out and seek a publisher so he could put a book together and sell 10 million copies. Come and listen to and see a man who saw the Lord. None of that from Paul. None of it. Which brings us to the second. He was a man of uncommon humility. Verses 5 and 6. Not only a man of unsurpassed privileges, 1 to 4. Verses 5 and 6, he is a man of uncommon humility. This bears close scrutiny. Don't just rush by these two verses. That experience is worth boasting about. He says that, as it were, in the flesh. It's something to be really proud of. But I'm not going to do that. I will boast only about my weaknesses. Look at the vulnerability here. I could boast about my strength. You haven't seen God. You haven't seen God. You haven't been in paradise. You haven't heard what I've heard. But I will not boast about it. What kept him from doing that? Because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message.
Paul is helping us answer a relevant question today. What if you struggle with a permanent disability? And you're listening to Insight for Living. There's much more to discover on this topic and others. In fact, today's program features just one of 12 in this classic series from Chuck Swindoll titled What If? To purchase the CDs or the downloadable audio files, go to insight.org. Anyone dealing with a disability or caring for someone with limitations knows what it's like to maintain a positive outlook. As an added resource to help you today, we'd like to send you a popular booklet Chuck has written. It's called Taking on Life with a Great Attitude. There's no cost or obligation. Request a free copy when you go to insight.org/attitude. This offer for the booklet is valid only in the United States. Chuck, it's the very last day of July and our final day to offer the 2 CDs called Finding Healing Through Forgiveness. In these messages, you described a surprising warning from Jesus about the danger of withholding forgiveness.
You use the word surprise, Dave, but for many folks, Jesus' words were downright shocking. You see, sometimes we look at forgiveness as a gentle and mild gesture of charity. It's a sweet little thing we do for reprobates, because the Bible commands us to do that. But that, my friend, is a shallow and twisted misunderstanding of biblical forgiveness. Listen carefully. Forgiveness requires far more than offering our offender a pious pat on the head. Now listen even more carefully. When we withhold mercy from someone else, when we insist on licking our wounds When we allow our self-righteous anger to simmer beneath the surface, we actually do damage to our own soul. Now, how do I know that's true? Over in Matthew chapter 18, Jesus said that those who fail to forgive are actually, and I quote, turned over to the torturers. In the Swindoll vernacular, let me put it this way. Indulging our resentment yields a hellish outcome. In a moment, we'll describe how you can receive 2 messages I have delivered on this very important topic. And I'm urging you to listen to these studies in Matthew because Jesus' teaching will liberate you from the bondage of bitterness. And in the second message, you will hear my wife, Cynthia, share the biblical principle of forgiveness that brought healing to a broken relationship in her own life. That healing forgiveness can be yours as well. Are you ready to make peace and restore your soul? Give us a call, go online, or write a letter and request the messages titled Finding Healing Through Forgiveness.